The first report came in on a Tuesday morning. A family of 4 walked into my ranger station carrying a stack of photographs and demanding to know why Campsite 27 wasn't marked on any of our maps. The problem was simple. There was no Campsite 27. Not now. Not ever. I had worked Blackwood National Forest for 8 years. I knew every campground, trailhead, and fire road in my district. But then the father handed me a photo. A weathered wooden sign standing beside a gravel road deep in the forest. The sign read, Campsite 27. And somehow, I knew I'd seen it before. After the family left, I couldn't stop looking at the photographs. The sign, the gravel road, the lake. Everything about it looked real. That was the problem. I had worked Blackwood National Forest for 8 years. I knew every campground, trailhead, and fire road in my district. There was no Campsite 27. I checked the district maps. Nothing. I checked archived maps. Nothing. I even searched old Forest Service records going back decades. No campground by that name had ever existed. Yet the family had photographs proving they had stayed there. The next afternoon, I drove out to the location they described, Mill Creek Road, 5 miles past the old bridge, exactly where they said the entrance should be. I found nothing. No gravel road, no sign, no gate, just dense pine forest stretching in every direction. I walked the area for nearly an hour before heading back to the station. At that point, I was convinced there had to be a simple explanation. Then, another visitor came in. An older couple, traveling in an RV. The woman placed a photograph on my desk. My stomach dropped. It was the same sign. Campsite 27. Same road, same trees, same campground. I spent the next 20 minutes asking questions. Their story matched the family's almost perfectly. A small lake, a host cabin, several campsites, a quiet campground deep in the forest. The strangest part? They couldn't find it anymore either. When they tried returning a few weeks later, the road was gone. Over the next several days, more reports arrived. A solo hiker, 2 college students, a man traveling with his dog. All of them claimed they had stayed at Campsite 27. All of them had photographs. All of them described the exact same place. And none of them could locate it again. By Friday, I had a stack of statements covering nearly half my desk. That's when I noticed something strange. The reports weren't recent. Some were from the previous year. One was nearly 4 years old. Another went back even farther. Different visitors, different years, same campground. I started writing dates on a whiteboard behind my desk, one by one. Then I stepped back. Every report fell within the same 7-day period, July 8th through July 14th. Every single one, no exceptions. I stared at the board for a long time. The campground appeared in photographs taken years apart. People claimed to stay there regularly, yet nobody could find it outside that 1 week. I looked down at the oldest photograph in the pile, a faded image from several summers ago. The familiar sign stood beside the gravel road, Campsite 27. And for the first time, I noticed something hidden in the background. A second sign. Mostly covered by trees, only 2 numbers were visible, 27. And beneath it, in smaller letters, open July 8th to 14th. That's when the mystery stopped feeling like a mistake and started feeling deliberate. The second week of July arrived 3 months later. By then, I'd almost convinced myself there had to be a logical explanation. Some forgotten private campground, a mapping error, a local legend that had grown into something bigger over the years. Then July 8th arrived, and everything changed. That morning, I was updating trail conditions at the ranger station when the district mapping system downloaded its weekly data refresh. Normally, I ignored those updates. Road closures, trail maintenance, minor changes, nothing interesting. But this time, something caught my eye. A new marker had appeared on the map. I froze. The label read, Campsite 27. For several seconds, I simply stared at the screen. The marker sat in the exact section of forest described in every report. Mill Creek sector, 5 miles beyond the bridge. Exactly where visitors claimed the campground existed. My pulse quickened. I zoomed in. The system showed an access road, individual campsites, a host cabin, even a small lake. It looked like a campground that had been part of Blackwood for decades, yet none of it had existed the day before. I immediately pulled archived versions of the map. Every previous version showed empty forest, no campground, no road, no lake. Nothing. Then I refreshed the archive again. My stomach dropped. Now the old maps showed Campsite 27 too. Every version, every year, as if the campground had always been there. I spent the next hour checking records, maintenance logs, inspection reports, reservation databases. Everything now listed Campsite 27 as an active campground. The files stretched back decades. Dozens of inspections, repair requests, wildlife reports, camp host assignments, thousands of records. All of them appeared completely normal. All of them impossible. When my supervisor arrived, I called her into the office. Marlene, look at this. She studied the screen, then frowned. What am I looking at? Campsite 27. Okay. I stared at her. You remember the reports? The missing campground? Yes. She looked confused. What missing campground? A cold feeling settled in my stomach. 3 months. 3 months she'd listened to complaints. 3 months she'd reviewed photographs. Now she looked at me as though none of it had happened. I pulled the folder from my desk. The witness statements were still there. The photographs were still there. The reports were still there. Marlene flipped through them, slowly. Her expression changed. What the hell? Exactly. That afternoon, I loaded my truck and headed for Mill Creek Road. I wasn't planning to wait for answers anymore. If Campsite 27 existed, I was going to see it myself. The drive took nearly an hour. The forest grew thicker as I climbed deeper into the district. Eventually, I reached the section where every visitor claimed the entrance appeared. I slowed the truck. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, because this time there was a road. A gravel road, wide enough for 2 vehicles, fresh tire tracks running through the dust, and beside it stood a weathered wooden sign, exactly like the photographs. Campsite 27. For a long moment, I simply sat there, staring. The sign looked old, not recently built, not abandoned. It looked like it had been standing in that spot for years, as if it had always belonged there. Then I shifted into drive and turned onto the road. The deeper I went, the quieter the forest became. No birds, no insects, no wind, just the crunch of gravel beneath my tires. Half a mile later, the trees opened, and I finally saw it. The campground, the host cabin, the lake. Every photograph had been telling the truth. Campsite 27 was real, and somehow it had appeared overnight. I parked beside the host cabin and shut off the engine. For a few seconds, I just sat there. The campground was real, not partially real, not the remains of an old campground, a fully functioning campground. The gravel roads were maintained. The picnic tables looked freshly stained. Fire rings sat neatly inside cleared sites. Even the trash bins looked recently emptied. If someone had dropped me there blindfolded, I would have assumed it had been part of Blackwood National Forest my entire career. Yet 3 months earlier, it hadn't existed. I stepped out of the truck. The silence hit me immediately. Not complete silence, just the absence of normal forest sounds. No birds, no squirrels, no insects. The only noise came from my boots crunching across the gravel. The host cabin stood near the center of the campground, a small wooden structure with a green metal roof exactly like the photographs. A sign hung beside the door, "Host on duty." The door stood slightly open. I knocked, no answer. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The cabin looked occupied. A coffee mug sat beside a radio, a jacket hung on a wall hook, a desk lamp glowed softly in the corner. But nobody was there. I checked every room. Empty. Whoever used the cabin had simply vanished. Back outside, I began walking the campground. Most of the sites were empty. A few RVs had arrived. 2 tents stood near the tree line. Families moved about normally. Children rode bicycles. People cooked lunch. Campers waved as I passed. None of them seemed concerned. None of them acted as though anything was unusual. To them, Campsite 27 was simply another campground. I stopped beside an older man setting up fishing gear. "How long have you been here?" I asked. "Since yesterday." "You ever been here before?" He smiled. "Every July." That caught my attention. Every July? "Best campground in the state." He pointed toward the lake. "Nobody knows about it." I looked around. The place was nearly full. At least 30 occupied sites. Families, hikers, retirees, people from several different states. Yet somehow, nobody seemed aware that the campground officially didn't exist. The deeper I looked, the stranger things became. Near the host cabin, I found a registration board, sheets of paper stretched back years, thousands of names. Every July, the same 7-day period, page after page, visitor after visitor. Then I noticed something odd. Certain names appeared more than once. Not repeat visitors. The dates didn't make sense. One woman appeared on a registration sheet from 1998, then again in 2007, then again in 2019. The same handwriting, the same address, the same signature. I checked another, and another. The pattern repeated. People who should have aged decades looked exactly the same in every record. A chill ran down my spine. That was impossible. I photographed everything, every page, every signature, every registration sheet I could find. Then I reached the oldest section of the binder. The pages were yellowed with age. Most dated back to the late 70s. One entry immediately caught my eye. Not because of the name, because of the occupation listed beside it. Forest Ranger. I leaned closer. The registration date read July 11th, 1978. My stomach tightened. The signature looked rushed, almost shaky. And beneath it, written in the comments section, were 4 words. "Road wasn't here yesterday." I stared at the page. A sudden breeze moved through the campground outside. The first breeze I'd felt all day. Somewhere near the lake, a child laughed. Then another voice joined in. Then another. I looked through the cabin window toward the shoreline. People were gathering there, dozens of them, standing silently near the water, watching something beyond the trees. And for reasons I couldn't explain, every instinct I had told me not to follow them. But I did anyway. I followed the crowd toward the lake. Nobody spoke. Families drifted between the trees as if responding to some silent signal. Children, parents, retirees, all moving toward the shoreline. The dock from the photographs stretched into the water ahead. Campers stood along the shore staring across the lake, watching. waiting. For what, I couldn't tell. Nobody seemed frightened. Most looked calm. A few were smiling. Then I noticed something wrong. Earlier that afternoon, I'd passed a family camping near Site 8. Blue tent, silver SUV, 2 young kids. Now the site was empty. The tent remained. The campfire still burned. Their chairs sat exactly where they'd left them, but the family was gone. I hurried over. No footprints, no signs of packing, no sign of a struggle. Just an abandoned campsite. I grabbed my radio. "Blackwood Station, this is Ranger Cole." Static. I tried again. Nothing. No signal. My phone wasn't any better. The campground was completely cut off. Then a scream shattered the silence. A woman. Close. I ran toward the RV section. Several campers stood gathered around Site 14. An older woman was crying beside a folding chair. "What happened?" I asked.
"My husband,"
she pointed at the chair.
"He was sitting right there."
A half-finished cup of coffee rested beside it. The chair still faced the road. The man was gone. Just gone. No one had seen him leave. No one knew where he'd gone. The strangest part came seconds later. People started walking away, returning to their campsites, returning toward the lake, as if nothing had happened. The woman stared after them.
"Wait!"
she shouted. Nobody stopped. A teenage boy looked back at her. "What's wrong?"
"My husband is missing."
The boy frowned. For a moment, he looked genuinely confused. Then he shrugged and walked away. I felt my stomach drop. He had already forgotten. As the afternoon continued, more people disappeared. One campsite, then another. An entire RV site stood empty before sunset. Each time, the remaining campers forgot faster. Friends forgot. Neighbors forgot. Even family members seemed unsure who was missing. Only I remembered. Back inside the host cabin, I began reviewing the registration records again. This time, I wasn't looking at names. I was counting. Arrival totals, departure totals, year after year. The numbers didn't match, not even close. Every July, dozens of visitors checked in, far fewer checked out. The discrepancy stretched back decades. Then I found a maintenance report from 1978. Only one sentence had been typed onto the page. Population increasing at shoreline after dark. I read it twice. Population. Not visitors, not campers. Population. A splash echoed from outside, then another, dozens of them coming from the lake. I stepped to the cabin window. Campers lined the shoreline again, standing shoulder to shoulder. Silent. Motionless. Moonlight reflected across the water, and beneath the surface, I saw shapes. Human shapes, standing far below the lake, watching the shore, watching the campers, watching us. And there were far too many of them to count. I couldn't stop staring at the lake. The shapes beneath the surface weren't reflections. They weren't shadows. They were people. Dozens of them, standing motionless on the lake bed, watching the shoreline, watching the campers, watching us. Then one of them moved, slowly. It raised an arm and pointed toward the shore. A moment later, a camper stepped forward. A man in his 40s, khaki shorts, fishing vest. The same man I'd spoken with earlier, the one who told me he visited every July. His expression was blank, almost peaceful. The other campers didn't react as he walked past them, didn't speak, didn't try to stop him. He stepped into the water, then kept walking. The lake reached his knees, his waist, his chest. Still, he continued forward. I started toward him, then stopped because movement rippled beneath the surface. The figures below were rising, not swimming, standing up, as if the bottom of the lake was lifting them toward him. The fishermen disappeared beneath the water, gone. The surface became still again. Nobody on shore reacted, not one. They simply continued staring into the lake, waiting, as if they already knew what came next. I backed away. Every instinct I had screamed to leave, now. Back inside the host cabin, I searched through every drawer, cabinet, and filing box I could find.
Near the bottom of a locked cabinet, I found a thin folder covered in dust. The date on the cover read July 1978. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single report written by a Forest Service ranger, the same ranger whose name I'd found in the registration logs. The final page was still there. Someone had never removed it. I began reading. The campground is not permanent. It appears during the second week of July. Visitors are drawn to the lake after sunset. The people below the water are former visitors. Every year, their numbers increase. The final sentence was underlined 3 times. The campground exists to feed the lake. I stared at the page. Outside, another scream echoed through the trees. Then another. Then silence. I ran outside. The campground had changed. Entire campsites stood empty. Rows of them, tents abandoned, campfires burning, vehicles sitting with doors open. The remaining campers were all moving toward the shoreline. Every one of them, like sleepwalkers, like people answering a call. The crowd reached the lake, then stopped. The water glowed faintly beneath the moonlight. Hundreds of pale figures stood below the surface now. Not dozens, hundreds. Faces from every decade. Campers, families, children, rangers, all staring upward, waiting. Then I saw something that nearly stopped my heart. One of them wore a green Forest Service uniform. The name tag caught the moonlight. I recognized it from the report, the ranger from 1978. He raised a hand, not toward the crowd, toward me, and slowly shook his head. No, don't come closer. At that moment, something grabbed my arm. I spun around. The older woman from Site 14, the one whose husband had vanished. Tears streamed down her face.
They took him?
She whispered. Then her expression changed. The fear disappeared. The sadness disappeared. A calm smile spread across her face, and she walked into the lake. I tried to stop her. I was too late. She vanished beneath the surface. The figures below closed around her. Then she was simply one of them. That broke whatever spell had held me there. I ran, past the host cabin, past the registration board, past the campsites. I reached my truck and floored the accelerator. The gravel road blurred beneath the headlights. The forest rushed past. Then suddenly, I was back on Mill Creek Road. The entrance was gone. No sign, no gravel road, no campground. Nothing. Just forest. I sat behind the wheel until sunrise. When daylight finally came, I drove back with a search team. We found no road, no lake, no cabin, no campground. Nothing. Officially, Campsite 27 doesn't exist. The Forest Service never found any missing persons. No records remain in the system. No maps show the location. The photographs disappeared from the station archives a week later. Even the registration pages I photographed were gone. But every year, when July approaches, I receive the same postcard. No return address, no stamp. Just a photograph of a campground beside a lake. On the back, written in the same faded handwriting from the 1978 report, are 4 words. We saved you a site. If you've made it this far, let me ask you something. If you were driving through a national forest and found a campground that wasn't on any map, would you turn around? Or would curiosity get the better of you? Because after what I saw at Campsite 27, I can tell you exactly what I'd do. I'd keep driving, and I'd never look back. If you enjoyed tonight's story, make sure to subscribe to Campfire Horror Stories and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next nightmare waiting in the dark. And while you're down there, leave a comment. Would you have investigated Campsite 27? Or left the moment you realized it shouldn't exist? As always, thank you for listening. Stay safe. Stay out of the water. And if you ever find a campground that only appears 1 week a year, don't check in.